Anybody want to preach this morning? They're such wonderful texts, full of spiritual meaning and deep delight. Not. I wrestled with these for quite a while. And the first thing that struck me was both in the Thessalonian reading and in the Luke reading, we're in the midst of what is lovingly called a church quarrel. Opposing sides of an issue having at one another. Now, I know that in your experience, churches never have quarrels. We never have any struggles, but in those days they must have. So I wanted to just touch briefly on that before I touch on the second half. I've actually found two things in the text. The first one was particularly looking at the Sadducees that Graham spoke of and their wonderful question. These are a group of men, religious men, probably religious conservatives. In their understanding of the laws of the Hebrew Scriptures, only the first 5 books count. Only the ones that came from Moses. Everything else was extraneous. If it wasn't in the first 5, God didn't say it. They come to Jesus and say, you're talking about this life beyond this life, and that's a ridiculous thing. Moses didn't say anything about it. So we're going to propose to you a question, and if you can answer it, then you'll help us understand how resurrection is all about. And they propose that ridiculous statement. It sounds odd to our ears. Think how odd it sounded to the ears of people around Jesus. What in the world is going on? It was a distraction. Jesus was challenging their assumptions that everything that was ever done by God was done in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and after that, it's all over and complete. There is nothing to change. There will be nothing new. We will have nothing more from God. And Jesus was challenging that, saying, it doesn't make sense, folks. God's the God of the living. There's still stuff going on. So this question was their way of doing what I'm going to call a Donald Trump. We're going to tweet about something that doesn't matter, that gets people all excited, so that they will be distracted from the real thing that we don't want to deal with. Now, we've never seen that in Canadian politics, have we? Blackface aside. The process of arguing is always an interesting one to study. And it happened then, and from time to time it may even happen now. And part of the wisdom of people, not just Christians, but of people, is to begin to learn to recognize those places that distract us from the real, difficult, important issues. And to focus on those and not be led off by all the wanderings of the butterflies. Now, that's not much of a sermon. A little bit of advice, I guess, but not much of a sermon. The real message that I see in both of these passages is about our wonderful willingness to apply our own human experience to what we think God is doing in the future. The Sadducees were like the gospel songwriters, talking about the streets paved with gold, and when I get to heaven, I'm going to have shoes to wear, and it's all just going to be wonderful, because that's the only way we can imagine what's out there. We can only imagine what life beyond this life would be like in human terms. We have no ability to think beyond human terms. You can try it, but it always is limited by our language, our experience, and the yearning that's deep inside us. The Sadducees did that, and they said, we can't go beyond here. We do it when we talk about heaven. But Jesus reminds us that there is nothing that limits God, not even our human language. God is not held to doing what we think God should do. God's power and grace will be to do what God wants to do. And we know that God is a God of love. So as we come to those moments where we're saying, what's next? What happens? What's life beyond life like? We need to not limit God. We know our Creator is a creator of love and infinite imagination. There is more to life than we experience now. There is a life beyond life. But let's not tie it down to streets paved with gold, because gold's awful hard to walk on. And it gets hot. God's promise is that our relationship with God will indeed be an intimate, personal, real experience. Not some wispy zephyr floating who knows where, but the object of God's love. A person capable of relationship. What that looks like, I don't know. I pray it won't have all the limitations of my body. But it will be what God gives me. And that's a pretty important kind of learning. That somehow we have to let our minds open up and be aware that God is at work doing wondrous, amazing, creative things beyond what we can imagine. And we trust that God does such in love, in hope, and in grace. We celebrated the life of one of the major characters of this congregation yesterday at this services. Harold has found the truth that we're still waiting to figure out. He and all those who've gone before us have entered into that new realm where God's wonderful creativity is at work, making life new. And all we can do is trust and know that that waits for us too. So in the midst of all this arguing, all this church fighting that's going on in the Scriptures, in the midst of all the tweets that send us off chasing whatevers, remember, God is at work, touching you, claiming you, and promising you fulfillment beyond your wildest dreams. May it be so.